morning, Emily. Thanks for joining the podcast today. So Emily is calling from Switzerland, but you're from the UK, and you're a consultant in impact measurement. So
Yes,
thank
correct.
you
Yeah.
for being with us today. Can you tell us exactly what it is that you do?
So basically, I come from quite a mixed background, but at all times, my focus has been on change and understanding why things happen the way they do. So one of the things that I discovered was this impact measurement and management work that is happening. Many organizations are dedicating their lives and their processes to encouraging change, positive change for the world to happen. And it ranges from everything from, the United Nations with their Sustainable Development Goal, very high level, right down to people working on a very micro scale in their village to improve some aspect of the way the world works. And the way that I understand impact is very much to be the change, that is what change is happening, why does it happen, and how can you boost what it is you're doing to be more efficient, more effective, and just deliver more change, but positive change, obviously. So the other flip side of this is the other side that impact measurement work does is identify the negatives from activities, from actions, and tries to minimize those. So it's a process to continually improve the way everything works, for the environment, for society, for people, for everything.
So as of now, it's really for big organizations as part of their corporate social responsibility, or could be a small organization, a small school, a city hall. I mean, it's really anyone.
The way I see it is for anybody, any organization. It could, as you say, it could be big companies. A lot of big companies are investing a lot at the moment in impact measurement. The words like impact investing and venture philanthropy are coming up a lot. And those are people with a lot of money wanting to put them into environmentally and socially positive places. And those organizations, they're doing a lot. They have a lot of resources. They can do a lot. But it's also for tiny organizations. It could be your village, village level or very small.
All right. So right now, impact is really trendy.
Yes.
We've seen this word. 5 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, impact was not very famous. People were talking about it, but now with climate change, people are, now we need to be impact driven. I've seen this in so many websites from venture capital funds. We're looking for impact driven startups. So coming from this world, you really dedicated your life to this. How do you make the difference between what is marketing, BS or greenwashing? That's what greenwashing. That's how they call it, and real impact work. How do you perceive this marketing, which is not what you do?
Right, exactly. So this is a very important distinction. CSR departments, big companies, they can often talk extremely convincingly about it, but the actual action, this is where the measurement comes in. If you're really dedicated to impact and to making a difference, you are open to the idea of tracking what it is that you do, whether that's through a program or sponsorship or like selling some new sorts of products. Impact, the process of creating impact is incredibly diverse. But what everyone who is really committed to it ideally commits to as well is tracking, monitoring, and revising what it is that they're doing. How so you take the time to design a set of metrics or other ways of following what it is you do, seeing the difference and understanding the difference that you make. Is it actually per person substantial? Is it a lot of people but some little impact? What is the scale? How many people are you affecting? To what degree? And you can to some degree track and follow what it is your product, your service, your change, your program is doing. And if you do that thoroughly, then you can also take the time to reflect on what you're doing, and every so often you take the time to revise and adapt and modify what it is you're doing to maximize the good impact that's coming out. And for me, that's what the impact measurement process is. It's understanding, it's helping organizations and people to understand what it is they're doing, how what they do makes the difference, and then working with them to make sure that they are able to track that in a really simple, direct sort of way.
but companies are supposed to track things already,
Of
right? I
course.
mean, you're supposed to look at the sales. You're supposed to understand your business inside out. Now,
Yeah.
what you do is you try to have different KPIs that are social, right? So it's
Social, environmental, yeah.
so it's having a different framework.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about there's a sort of the triple bottom line, right? So there's the people, there's the
Mm-hmm.
planet, and then there's profit. And most companies are extremely good at tracking the profit metrics. They know, as you say, they know about their sales, they know about their customers and that kind of thing. And for many of them, the people and the planet is less of a priority, but many companies are becoming aware of just the interconnectedness between them. And you do see some really interesting examples. So I'm on a platform at the moment called Impact, and I was doing a research note for them on Kering, which is a huge fashion retailer, sort of one of the sort of multi-giant ones. And they fund Mongolian cashmere farmers to improve the way they do things, because one of the issues that they are seeing is that cashmere production is causing desertification in Mongolia. Yeah. So they've actually put money behind action, and they are then tracking that over time. And they're doing that together with the university. So, that they've also got their research integrity and rigor there. It's not just, oh, here's some money. They are really doing a proper job of it. And, I think that sort of action really can make a difference. People who talk a lot, but don't put money behind it and don't change what they do, this is of course unsatisfactory in my opinion.
So would you say that so you have the framework, you try to find the best indicators, collecting the information. So you mentioned it's about tracking and having enough money to track. So it means research. So any impact research costs a lot of money.
It doesn't have to. I mean, one of the things I work with is a lot of early stage companies and projects who don't have a lot of human or financial capacity. Okay. And then one of the things for them is to kind of pick 2 or 3 things that they can track very easily as part of their day-to-day operations that allow them to get a sense of whether what they're doing is really achieving what they want. A lot of them are social enterprises or non-profit associations that are driven by a mission to change something. And then it's helping them to identify, okay, so we have, maybe it's £200 a year to put into this process of impact measurement. What can we do with that? Is it as simple as one survey with 10 questions that we send to everybody that we work with? It can be as simple as that. And that can be enough for them to be confident that what they're doing makes a difference, and to get a sense of, could they do things better? Could they be more efficient? Could they be more effective? Or as you say, it can be a huge process, and many companies now are investing in their impact measurement and have multiple staff members dedicating themselves to this. For me, it is also very much connected to business development and strategy and communications. So what you're saying earlier about the greenwashing, yes, that does happen, but actually it can also help a company distinguish itself from the competition if they really are committed and they have good stories to tell and can show that they're doing things differently. It can be a really worthwhile investment.
Yeah, for some companies, really part of the DNA. If you take Patagonia, it's really, I mean, it's always one of the example that people are mentioning is because this is really part of their DNA.
Absolutely. I love it. They're a great example of a company that talks, but also acts.
Yeah. But so far, when you work with all your organizations, would you say they're good at talking and then implementation is a little bit lagging behind? Or
This is very often a challenge. I mean, I have a research background. I've been handling data for the last 10, 15 years in different contexts, qualitative, quantitative. So I'm trained in data handling and how you interpret things like graphs and quotes and things. How do you turn that into something useful? And this is not for everybody. I mean, many people bring completely different skill sets to their projects and their businesses. And one of the things that I see my role as a consultant is to, when I join a project or support an organization, is to help build the capacity of the organization team in how they can handle their own data, because it is not easy necessarily. Know how to take, doing a Google survey, 10 questions takes you 5 minutes to make. What you do with that data afterwards, this is not always clear to people who've not got a background in data handling. And so one of the things I work with is to help them make things that they can directly use, but are also very, very simple. And I think that capacity is something that many projects would do better with a little bit more of that within their team. And if I can help them develop that capacity, then great. Often it ends up with one team member taking on that responsibility, and they'll learn how to do it, and then they support their own organization. I think that's really.
And obviously, when you work with your clients, it's very long-term oriented.
That's the ideal for me, because it's so for example, this organization capacity I set up with a bunch of others, a group of us set up this, we support refugee and migrant entrepreneurs here in Zurich with business development. Now, we set it up in 2015. In 2016, we ran our first program, and we're still working with some of the alumni, 5 years later. Mm-hmm. Entrepreneurship, for example, business development is a really slow process. You don't necessarily turn a profit within a year, and it's not necessarily easy to set up particularly a social enterprise, or one with a give back to a local community or something. It's not necessarily easy to set that up in a short time frame. So actually, it's taken some of our alumni 5 or 6 years to get to the point where they can really see their product making a difference. And if you don't have the capacity to track them for that time, it can be a little bit frustrating. But also you think, oh, we're putting money in, but nothing's coming out. What it is coming out. It's just taking a while. And if you're talking about something like climate change, I mean, no one is going to fix climate change overnight. No way. But if you track things like greenhouse gas emissions over 30 years, action is being taken. It is slow. It is too slow, arguably, but it is things change, but you need the tracking in place, and you need to have a commitment to tracking that and monitoring that and working on improving it. But it might be a 30-year process before you see a change. And if we're talking about things like societal change, integration of refugees to society, or alleviating poverty, I mean, these are also very long-term challenges. These are wicked problems that are caused by many, many factors. And again, changing those and tracking change in those over time is also a big challenge.
You can improve what you can measure. That's what people
exactly.
always say.
You need to start somewhere, and if you're not looking, then anything can happen. If you are looking, then at least you know what's happening, and even if it's getting worse, you can say, okay, it's getting worse. We know the problem is getting bigger. This stimulates us to take action.
Would you say it's now easier to collect data, to track things, no matter what the KPI is?
I think so. I think the advent of the internet obviously made a huge difference, but also these cloud platforms like Google, also SurveyMonkey. There are lots of survey tools, for example, that are very free and easy to access. I was actually involved with a hackathon recently that was online because of COVID. But one of the things there where people were talking about, how do you collect data in an age where you cannot even go out to communities, particularly rural communities where there is no internet? What do you do then? And people were talking about, how do you access things like via surveys, via telephone, mobile phone messaging surveys, and a lot of it is if you can't actually even go visit the poorest members of society whom you're trying to help. And that was really creative to see what some of them were coming up with. And how do you empower local people within the village? They were kind of suddenly changing the power balance from externals coming in to measure and evaluate and audit to, okay, now we need to rely on the person in the village who we've radioed a set of questions to. Can they go and ask everyone and then radio us the data? And so it was really interesting to see.
So is it a good example of some information that is difficult to collect? Or what is the most difficult piece of information you have to collect to assess an objective, see what the impact is? And do you have any example of a piece of information that is very difficult to get?
So I always find data around emotions challenging to collect in a meaningful way. I think, a lot of these projects, if you look at, again, going back to the Sustainable Development Goals, this is kind of the gold standard of changing the world for the better, right? Within there are lots and lots of metrics around access to education, access to clean water, very sensible, quite easy to measure. How many hours a day do you go to pick water? This is easy. Things like, do you feel able to go and do something? Do you feel empowered to go and do something? Do you feel more confident doing something? Do you feel part of something? These are also aspects of the SDGs and also many other projects. And those are really hard because what might be meaningful to you might be very different to me. When I think of empowered and you think of empowered, I feel empowered. We might be thinking very different experience. We might be coming from very different experiences. And so when we both tick the yes box on a survey, for example, it doesn't tell a lot to me as the person then analyzing the data. Oh, everyone feels empowered. But actually for one of us, that might mean I feel free to take action. And for the other one, that simply means I feel more confident. I'm going to sign up for something.
Yeah.
And so actually, I think that's when blending quantitative and qualitative data becomes really interesting, also challenging.
But you mostly rely on survey when it comes to this type
I
of
do a
question?
lot of qualitative work because I work a lot with social projects with a social aspect. And when you're talking with people, yes, quantitative data is very useful to get kind of an overview, but you need sometimes a qualitative depth. And so
Yeah.
I also use a lot of interviews to burrow into experiences
Yeah.
and emotional things.
Have you heard about the book called Everybody Lies? Have you heard about it?
I have just come across it. I've been doing a lot of research in the last few weeks, and I'm compiling a book list, and this is on it because it looks really interesting.
Because I mean, now things are. I mean, a lot of things are online, and so you don't necessarily need to ask people if they feel empowered. You just need to look at what they're doing on the internet, and what they're doing is telling you if they feel empowered or not. So probably for some of the question when it comes to impact measurement, we just need to look at what people are doing. It probably is going to be, I mean, not as biased as asking them what they think, because I'm pretty sure, I mean, that's the problem when you ask people what they think is they don't really tell the truth because they don't really necessarily understand what the question is, or, you know.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So it's part of what you're doing. I mean, you try to improve the way you collect the data.
Yeah, and it depends, comes down to resources. If a project wants to find this out and they have the time to put someone onto researching their participants' online life, for example, fantastic. But that's a very time-consuming process. And at some point there is a trade-off between the ideal, which probably involves someone tracking everybody full time, versus the reality of no resources at all and no time. So we're going to do the bare minimum. And finding a happy balance between those is always part of the application. But there are a lot, for example, of online tools and processes, and it gets complicated very rapidly because the minute you put data management in there, you can always collect more. But sometimes one of the arts of impact measurement is to know what to focus on, and 2 most important things for this small project at this moment, or the 6 big things that this company ought to be really, really putting time into. Is it better to do 20 things, but each one very small, or 6 things really, more depth? Those are kind of trade-offs that are very context dependent. And again, that's one of the things, you can discuss with clients and projects that you work with. How do they make those decisions?
When you work with all those different clients, I guess they are from different industry. How do you, and I'm sure to find the best framework, you really need to understand the business. So how do you get to know all those different business with from all those different industry? How do you educate yourself?
It's definitely a challenge. It's kind of the fun part of being a consultant is you get to go and work with all these different projects, but there's always it is different to working within a team, within your own organization. And so one of the things I always do is ask them to tell me stuff. I obviously go into my research, I ask them for background documents, but I also take the time to sit with them, ideally as a team if it's a small team, or with the relevant people if it's a bigger team. But I always just try and give them the space to tell me what they think is important. And what's quite scary, interesting, I don't know which, is when you get people together and then they say different things. You think particularly a small social enterprise, everyone's surely committed to the same thing, but they're coming at it from different perspectives, and you're sitting there going, interesting, so you're rating this very highly and you're rating that very highly. Maybe we'll do both, but maybe you guys should also talk. And for me, this is where the strategy comes in, because impact, asking these questions, what is the most important thing? What are we going to focus on? You have this tiny block of money. What are you going to invest that into within your project? Can cause people to really reconsider what is it we're doing and why, and what is the most important thing for us at this time. And so there's kind of it's always a privilege to watch that realization process in time.
You don't feel the pain or the willingness to go niche and say, okay, I just do impact for industry, let's say car manufacturers or brand. No, you really try to be, I mean, you don't want to focus on any specific segment.
At the moment, I'm very broad in my interests. I'm happy to work with anybody who's committed to change. And I think for me, it's the willingness to actually act that marks out projects that I want to work with, because it's one thing to kind of help people write a big report that says, well, no, this is the most important thing, but it's a very different thing to watch them translate that into action. And I think that motive to act is far more interesting, and the process of implementing it far more interesting than actually, I mean, the understanding process is important, but for me, the action is crucial, because without the action, it's just a lot of hot air. And there's only so many reports people are going to read. It's when people start to really do it, that's when it gets interesting. And so for me, that motive is almost more important than the context.
Do you have an example where the impact was terrible and they didn't know about it? Because they haven't measured that ever.
I think, so coming back to Capacity, this organization I co-founded a few years back, we ran this program in 2016. And I would say at the time we were highly naive. We did not know that much about running a program. We did not know that much about working with refugees. And we had some real struggles in the first couple of months of the program to communicate with the participants. You know, we'd set up meetings, they would not turn up. They would send out documents, they would not come. And it was only after like several weeks of struggle and irritation, and we were getting very frustrated with them and saying, oh, they're not interested, like we're offering all this stuff and they're not taking advantage, that we actually sought to stop and ask them, how would you like to be communicated with? We just hadn't thought to ask them this, because we just assumed email. You know, we just said email is perfect, everyone uses email. And a bunch of them returned to us and said, thank you for asking. We actually don't have a computer. So email, particularly emailed documents, are really difficult to read on our phones. We would much prefer if you wrote the key information in a WhatsApp message. I mean, I didn't even have a smartphone at this time. So for me also, like the computer was the way you communicate.
When was that?
2016, I was not technologically advanced with smartphones. I'm now very addicted to my smartphone. It's scary how rapidly that changed. You know, so I didn't even have WhatsApp. So for us, this was really a moment when we had not bothered to even think about how do we make an impact. We had just assumed we will do it like this and it will be effective, and it wasn't. So stopping to ask, when something isn't going right, like stopping to just to say, we are assuming a lot of things here, maybe those assumptions are wrong, can be very powerful. It wasn't,
even
I would say, a disaster.
From yourself. I mean, basically, when you start with a project, you should not have any assumption, or you should really test everything and ask questions.
I think so. I think I think just being aware where there's an assumption, I think that can be very difficult, because particularly if you're all from kind of the same background, you assume things work a certain way because you've never seen it work a different way. And again, one of the things impact measurement does is it forces you to consider the assumptions you're making and the logical leaps. We do this, therefore this happens. In between, there's a big assumption that this thing will happen. And it forces you to be aware, oh, we're assuming that by providing classes, people will learn. Actually, you've no guarantee that someone taking your class will learn anything. All you can do is hope and then work to ensure that they get as much support to learn as possible. Ultimately, they could still sit there and it could be the best class and they could still not listen and not learn anything, or not understand it and not, you know. But I think the impact measurement process forces the assumptions to the surface. And then you can look at them and say, oh gosh, that's really a big assumption. Maybe we should reduce it in these ways by, you know, putting this in place or changing this and make it a little bit more certain.
So I guess for the type of work you're doing, you must be optimistic, right? I mean, measuring change, I mean, if you're pessimistic, is not a work people should do, right? Do you have any tips for any organization who would want to get started with, you know, measuring impact? What are the few tips or takeaways that they could apply, even if they don't have the budget? Because I understand from our discussion is it needs to commit long term and have some budget. It's not something a small organization could start if they don't have the budget or they're struggling.
Let me stop you there. I disagree with that. I actually think anybody can start measuring.
No, but that's
measurement is absolutely accessible. I think what it needs is just an understanding of what you're trying to achieve, and a willingness to examine that. If you're doing something and you're not willing to have someone or you're not willing yourself to analyze whether what you're doing makes a difference, then what you're doing is probably done from a place of fear and not a place of confidence. And I think if you're confident, you can take it when someone says, hey, you know what, you could do this better. There's a, you can adjust it, you can improve it, you could even do something completely different, which would be more impactful.
Mm-hmm.
If you're scared of, and it's not to say you shouldn't be scared. I mean, of course, anybody running a project, there's always a huge element of uncertainty, which is very concerning. But I think if you're open to looking at what you're doing and how you're doing it and what's happening from it, and interested, I think you have to also be interested. It's not, you're not just doing it because you think you're doing it because you think it's the right thing to do, but you have to also be open and questioning, is it the right thing to be doing? And am I doing things as best I can? There may be many other ways of doing it. That's not to say your way is wrong. But you have to at least be open to the idea that maybe things need to change over time. Maybe someone else can do it more effectively because of something else, like they just got a different team member, or they set it up differently, or their context is a bit more advantageous. And that's fine. I mean, I met a truly inspiring person once who said, I set up a whole business. We designed this whole robot thing. I think it was doing, I don't remember what exactly, something to do with wastewater management. And he said, and I did some competitive analysis. We had this thing ready to go. We had already clients on board to buy it. I did some competitive analysis and I worked out someone had a better solution. And I stopped immediately. I shut my company down and I went to work for them because I thought I would be more effective working for them and helping them push their better product than I would competing with my less good product. And I really was astonished because this is a very, very brave move to have made. But he took an impact measurement approach and he analyzed the two, as far as he could, the two things, and said, well, his impact will be, this other company will have much more impact than me because it's cheaper, it's easier. And so I would prefer to help them scale their impact than have an equivalent, but neither of us gets as high as we could together. This was really astonishing for me. But I think anyone can do it, really. You just need a willingness and a curiosity about what you do and how.
And so what is the way to get started? Do you have a book? Is there a good podcast or anything to get started? How did you get started?
I guess I was setting up capacity. We were continually asked, what are you going to be achieving with your program? And so we had to continually talk about this to funders, and it made me dig in a bit further. There were words like theories of change coming up and impact staircases. And I was like, what are these? And I started looking and realized that I really liked this. So I think if you Google theory of change, this is basically the baseline. This is your idea of how you make a difference with your product, your service, your business, your idea. How do you make a difference? And if you can write that as a kind of 2-sentence thing, I do this, therefore this other thing happens. Once that happens, the beneficiary, the people we're trying to support, the context we're trying to change, they changes in this way. If you can make that 2 sentences, that's really a great way to get started, because it says you have something, you're going to be changing something, and here's how.
And according to you, what is the reason this impact, trend is becoming very hype at the moment? Is it because of climate change or the speed of change? Both?
I think both. I mean, I think the renewal of interest in climate change, because my background is in the environmental studies, conservation. So of course, for me, it's always been a big trend. But I know that in the 60s and 70s, this was huge. People were expecting an environmental apocalypse any minute.
Yeah.
With the rise of the discovery of the the ozone hole. You remember when you were young as well.
16,
you
17,
don't really hear about that now because other concerns have stepped in. But there was a kind of a big dip in the 90s and early 2000s, and I feel like it's renewed again, this concern about climate change. So that's definitely driving a lot of the interest. But I think also the moral realization that big companies can drive a lot of positive change. I think a lot of companies are realizing actually that they do have a role and that they should be active, which is quite exciting to watch. I think, but I think there's a huge amount of inertia to overcome within the way society works. Obviously, I also live this very luxurious lifestyle, consuming way above my carbon footprint. And I'm someone who's pretty aware of that and looks for ways to minimize it. But it's just the way I live.
So
and it's very hard to change that.
You have a framework for your family as well? Like trying to have some objective for your kids and
Yeah, this
Yeah.
would be a very nice idea. I don't have a very concrete one. I just have a few points where, like, particularly big ticket purchases that the family might be making. I'm always like, let's look and see if there's a better, reuse one, or find one that's definitely got a lower carbon footprint. Let's try and do that. But it doesn't always go down well with all of my family. Not everyone is as dedicated as I am.
All right. Thank you very much, Emily. It was a pleasure to discuss with you about impact measurement and information and knowledge. Thank you very much. Is there anything you would like to add to help someone to get started? So you mentioned Google. Any last tips or word of wisdom, something?
I think one of the things I've noticed is that people are quite scared by the complexity of when they search for impact measurement. It gets complex very quickly. A lot of companies really throw themselves into big databases and things. For me, impact measurement is very simple. You start off with understanding what you do. And once you understand what you do, then you can start to ask questions about that. And anybody can do that, really. I mean, in my view, anybody is capable of setting up a very simple impact measurement framework, and not to be scared off. Don't be scared off by the apparent complexity of it. It is actually at heart very, very simple. Do you know what you do? Do you understand why it happens? And do you see a way to improve what you do? And if so, that's the basis. That's the basis of everything.
So keep it simple. Don't be scared, and start somewhere, because
absolutely better to start. Start somewhere. Don't not start. Definitely start. Anybody, really, it applies to any company, any project. If you can have that discussion, have a cup of tea with your team. See if you can pin that down. That would be a really nice and easy way to start.
Okay, well, we will try on our end. See if
Aurelien, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye.